So here are the little people. I think you can see them all. On the top shelf we have most of the shorter ones. We've got a little guy called, gosh, I forgot his name. A little Pixie. We've got little Pete from the Duckworths. He's from the 1980s kind of more modern family. We've got Pipkin, I think his name is. Pipkin here. A little Pixie with hands on his hips. Oh, not all of them stand up brilliantly. And a little Jerkin. Then we've got, I may as well show you the little one that fell over. This is Alfie, or Michael, I forgot the name. This little guy I was really, really pleased with. It was very, very hard to make. I had to make all of the parts separately and then join them together. Unfortunately, he's lost an arm. That's why I've put him on the side. But his little face is just as I wanted it to be. And he's not poseable. But that's because he's just so small. So far, his little fingers haven't broken off, nor have his toes. And I gave him kind of elf-like ears, but then afterwards I regretted that. In any case, he's my kind of perfect little baby chap. Then there is Gilbert. Gilbert is a little ugly guy, but he's beautiful ugly. And he's got kind of protruding teeth, a little snub nose, and a kind of gormless smile, but I love him. He's a kind of country yokel pixie. We've got another very tiny pixie down there. I think he's called Pippin or something. I forget all the names. Another one of the 7 dwarves in the back there. Now, we have the star of the show, who's called Little Pixie. Not very imaginative, but it kind of suits his generic face, I think. And he starred in lots of my children's stories. Because his face, because I don't know what it was about him, his face just seemed to lend itself to lots of different expressions, so I didn't have to sculpt lots of different heads. And also I could Photoshop a few expressions on his face just by changing a smile to a frown, or altering his eyebrows. He's fully poseable, but because he's broken so many times, because he was positioned such a lot for the children's stories, which I'll show you in another video, I can't actually move him very much anymore. I do absolutely love Little Pixie though, and although his face is really, really basic, it was very difficult to do and very difficult to get exactly as I wanted it, which is how he is at the moment. Then we've got a little girl called Greta, who I imagine to be a little Swedish girl. She's super tiny. She has a little ash blonde plait, little, sorry, I can't work out which way, put my hand, little boots. She lives on a farm, and I had the farm made, and she also featured in a children's story. Not that I made her to that I made any of these little people to star in the children's stories when I made them. I hadn't even written some of the children's stories. I had the idea to use them for the illustrations later. But yes, I love Greta. She's a very cute little person. And I think I would say she's about 3 or 4 or 5 years old. Then another favourite is Mavis. My mum actually called this little character Mavis. Mavis is one of the Duckworths, or one of the more modern characters and is meant to be dressed as maybe a 4-year-old from the 1980s. She has little spiral hair and she has a lovely little face. Not pretty as such, but kind of delightful. I love Mavis very much. She's a very delicate little figure actually. I have to be really careful when I bend her arms. All of the Duckworths have yet to star in a story of their own, but I hope to make that happen in the future sometime. Then there's Jim. Now Jim is meant to be a little boy from the 30s, quite poor, a raggedy jumper made with wool that I frayed around the edge, little boots I bought in a doll's house shop. His one tooth is, well, quite a few teeth are missing, so I'd say he was about 6 or 7. And he did have freckles, but they've worn off a little bit. And he lives in a little red brick house from the 30s, which I'll show you later. Then we have Lily, who is a delightful little girl from the Duckworths. I'd say she's about 3. I tried to make her pretty, but with a snub nose, so kind of cute as well. It's actually quite hard to make these figures pretty. They lend themselves more to being kind of idiosyncratic. Then we have Sleepy, or Simpkin I think I called him. He's the youngest of the 7 dwarves. He reminds me a little bit of Mr. Bean for some reason. We've got Bo Peep, who was pretty difficult to make. I had to work out how to make the mop cap. My mum made this beautiful smocking on the dress. I glued lace to her hands for the gloves, made the shepherd's crook by bending some wire. I think my mum made these gorgeous little bloomers. She's fully posable. She has ash blonde hair, big blue eyes, and very, very tiny features, a tiny little nose and lips. And she's meant to look like perhaps a Lucy Atwell child, or someone, well, she's obviously from an old-fashioned nursery rhyme. And then we have Shabana, who is also one of the Duckworth, not the Duckworth family, but from their street, I think. And she's in her school uniform. And I really liked her face. It seemed to work out like almost as if I'd carved it with, oh, her shoe just fell off. Carved her from wood, the planes in her face, so that she reminds me of a little puppet when I look at her. I really love her, and I like the way the colours of her outfit complement her skin and colouring. Then we've got a very big, fat, jolly dwarf called aptly Happy. And I think I took him from some Enid Blyton book. We've got a very tiny little old lady, and I just call her the old woman. She was holding a cast iron teapot and a china cup and saucer. I don't know where they've gone. I think they're at home with lots of the other furniture and accessories. She's missing a few teeth, I think. And she's very, very ancient indeed, or meant to be. And she's also quite poor. She was one of the first models I made, and because I had a bit more energy then, I went to the trouble of making bloomers and petticoat for her, and cotton muslin or lawn, and making her boots properly, and starching and ironing her dress, and doing everything absolutely as correctly as I could. But towards the end of the 180th or 220th or however many there were, I kind of lost heart a little bit. So some of the later models aren't so carefully made. Then we've got a little boy who was holding a hot water bottle, red hot water bottle. He's about to go to bed. He's in his onesie and he's got his nightcap on. He's actually a little pixie, although sometimes I wish I hadn't made the pixie ears on these people, and then they would be, I could use them in lots more different ways. I think I called him Michael. He's also posable. Then we've got another little pixie from an Enid Blyton book, I think, and I called this little pixie Skip, and he's just a jolly little chap bounding around. One ear's broken there. I glued the leggings to his Fimo legs. The only way you can do really tight-fitting clothing is to glue it, I found. And again, he's got the same fabric as the traveller's scarf, the same stripy fabric that was once my t-shirt. And then the last model on this little shelf is a little girl called, I think I called her Jasmine, and she's supposed to be of Asian origin, and again she's from the Duckworths, so she's supposed to be dressed as a little girl might be in the late 80s, early 90s, and I wanted her primrose yellow dress to complement her pale blue, baby blue tights and dark blue shoes. Then on the shelf below, I'll just lower this, we have Maria, who is supposed to be an old German lady. She has a silver cross necklace, two parts of which have broken off. The making of this silver cross was possibly the single most difficult thing I made during this modelling process. I can't quite remember how I even made it. I think I made it from Fimo and painted it with silver paint. She is a very practical old lady. She's got her hair bound in a snowy white plait. I imagine she's possibly German, possibly Swiss. She has green clogs, blue painted tights. You can see the wool that I used to wrap the limbs there. Herringbone tweed skirt, no nonsense pinny, practical warm woolly cardigan, blue tank top, and pristine white blouse. She's got wrinkles around her eyes. And then we've got the drunkard or the sailor, who has 9 o'clock shadow, a plait, and was holding a flagon of whiskey or something, and he was sitting propped up against a barrel. It's quite obvious he has had a bit too much to drink. We've got Wee Willie Winky, who was holding a candlestick, has got a little spotted shorts, little tweed slippers glued on his feet, and possibly the piece of clothing I'm most proud of, which is this little blue and white striped nightshirt I made for him. And unlike most of the other clothes, doesn't have bits of glue here and there and a mess under one arm or the hem going skew-if. I took so much time making both the hat and nightshirt for Wee Willie Winky, and he's a bit of an anxious little chap. And then we have, in the corner, we have a little old lady with black boots, bloomers, pinafore, headscarf, and some warm clothing. I imagine she lives in Scandinavia. Then we have Miss D Nightshade, who has rather gothic coloured lips and eye makeup and hairdo. She has a brown furry pipe cleaner stole, which is meant to be fur, and a dark brown, I'm not sure what this fabric is, but a genuinely fitted suit that was cut out from a pattern I made. And Miss Deadly Nightshade is a lady you would not want to cross. We have, I'm trying to remember the name of this king. This was taken from a Ladybird book, I think The Firebird, and he was an emperor in it, but I called him, I think I called my figure King Nicholas the Terrible, or Nikolai the Terrible, or something like that. I didn't finish his legs, as you can see, but I did paint his shoes gold and dressed him in jewel colours, gave him flame orange hair, a couple of wee teeth, some rings on his fingers, and I made the crown by wrapping a furry pipe cleaner around a Fimo base, then putting little fake jewels on the base, gold thread, and actually a rather wonky Fimo top painted gold to the hat. Then we have a figure that I'm actually quite proud of. I call her Old Mrs. Eyebright. She's a fairy woman in a long brown coat picking up her parcel. The parcel and the bag, by the way, are just from a Doll's House shop. She has little tights, little check tights, bloomers, petticoat dress, and skirts under her coat. She has a little rough lace collar, and her snowy white hair's swept up into a bun on the top of her head, and her mouth is kind of puckered in the way very old ladies' and gentlemen's mouths tend to be, and she has a little pointy nose, and her hands are kind of wrinkled and knuckly like old people's hands. There, you can kind of see it now. Then we have a little boy from the Duckworths called, I think I called him Harvey. I really love Harvey. He's got a lovely little face. He has a few different outfits actually, and this is just the one he happens to be wearing. When I say you've got a few different outfits, I mean the head can detach and join onto a few other bodies. I'd say Harvey is probably about 5. Then we have, Harvey's not very good at standing up. A little old lady, I think I called her Lavinia Lovelace for the Duckworths. The Duckworths I imagined living in a guest house. And I imagined in this guest house lots of regular characters, so perhaps people who live there all the time. I don't know if you remember in Fawlty Towers, the Majors seem to live there all the time, and I imagine Lavinia Lovelace to be one of those ladies who lives in the guest house pretty much all year round, or perhaps she could just be a neighbour a couple of doors down from the Duckworths. And I'll come back to the Duckworths later. But I imagine them living in a guest house by the sea, a kind of 4-storied house in a typical small British seaside resort. I'll put Lavinia back. Her glasses are just wire bent around, I can't remember, a thick knitting needle, I think. Then we have, I can't remember what I called the jester, but my mum and I had quite a headache making his costume. Little bells are attached to his hat. I think the hat was the worst bit actually. I remember my mum and I really scratching our heads trying to think how to make the pattern for this. Jinx, that's right, Jinx his name is, and he's got 1 orange and 1 black foot. His legs are just Fimo. I could get a better shape just moulding them from the clay rather than trying to cover the clay in fabric. Then we've got an old gardener. I do hope I've got his hat somewhere. No, it seems to have gone. But he did have a nice battered hat, and I called him Alfred Witt. He's got that kind of Victorian, really long sideburn slash beard thing going on along his jaw, and he's got a very, very friendly face. He's got a little waistcoat, a little round rough-necked shirt. His pinny, which is tarnished with real soil, is kept up with a bit of old rope. He's got real soil on his boots, and his little waistcoat is backed. Actually, I think this was from a real waistcoat front and back, and at some point hopefully I'll find his hat again. Now we have Father Christmas, and I modelled this Father Christmas on the Father Christmas from the Coca-Cola adverts, this kind of 1950s glowing, I was going to say sun-kissed Father Christmas, but I guess he's snow-kissed. And I think he turned out more or less pretty much like the Coca-Cola advert Father Christmas. He's probably one of the tallest figures. And I also gave him a map to hold, and because when I put him in one of the children's stories, which was the first children's story, sorry, my knees, ow. When I put him in one of the children's stories, which was called Where's My Story, and the star of the story was Little Pixie, Father Christmas appeared at the end of it, and he was lost. So I made a map suggesting that he was lost, and on the map we have Fairyland here, we've got the North Star there, we've got the North Pole here, Toyland here, we've got a sea monster there, we've got Never Never Land here, Something Island here, Island, and then the Land of Human Beings here. I'm missing a square of my map. This is just a piece of paper folded up and then stained with coffee to look like old parchment. Now we have Reg. Reg is from the Duckworths. He's a lovely old chap, I've lost one of his ears, who lives down the road from them and sort of suns himself with some other old gentlemen on the seafront or in the gardens. Then we have the washerwoman, who is one of my favourite, she's got a bit of cotton, favourite models. She's curtsying, she's got little black shoes, yellow striped tights, she's holding up her pinafore and curtsying. Her little bonnet we found in a doll's house shop, but apart from that I made everything else. Now on the bottom shelf, I'll just lower this once more. On the bottom shelf we have let me put this roll of wrapping paper here. First of all, we have Ernie and Jem, which are two old medieval chaps having a good old chinwag. I can't remember which is Ernie and which is Jem, but Jem is saying to Ernie, "Did you hear about so-and-so?" and gesturing with his thumb over his shoulder. He has his flagon. He has a kind of cotton smock and legging type shoe things, and he has a kind of Middle Ages headdress, tweedy headdress. And then Ernie has a little white goatee, a black headdress, a white smocking top, and his legs are bound with fake fleece and cotton on the bottom, and then cotton thread on the bottom and then cotton on the top, and he's leaning on his stick, and they just kind of chat to each other like that. Then we have Beth, who is one of the rare models that I think is actually pretty or beautiful. As I said, it's quite hard to make a pretty or beautiful model, but I really think she is. She's a little milkmaid or a goat herd or something like that. She has clogs. She's very poor. She's missing a few buttons, unfortunately. And yeah, I really love her a lot. Then we have Julia, who is a glamorous 1930s lady. The pearls are not very successful, but they were the smallest beads I could find at the time. She has pearl earrings, a kind of very stylish 30s bob cloche hat. Is that a cloche hat? A kind of devilish shade of lipstick, a fur stole. This is actually, I think, from a sheepskin coat, and a real silk, emerald silk flapper girl dress. Is that a flapper girl dress? I'm not sure. But in any case, my darling mum made this and ironed the pleats into it with great care by pinning it in place on the arm of an armchair and then ironing it, and we starched it. Yeah, so Julia is, oh, she also has red nail varnish, and she has a diamond ring. Then we have, I can't remember what I called this guy. I think he's Mr. Milton, and he's a gardener, and I was very pleased with how his hat turned out. I was kind of getting into the swing of making these then. His shirt, his apron with gardening tools, neckerchief, string holding up his apron, his work trousers and boots, his kind of yokelly beard. Then we have Mr. John Bull, who was a character in a Ladybird book. He wasn't called Mr. John Bull in the book at all. He didn't have a name. He was just kind of an extra in the background, but I loved him. And just try and blow some of the dust off. And made him. He has quite a ginormous head actually, and girth. He has a tweed suit, paper collar, red silk tie, real waistcoat, material waistcoat. He has those kind of socks up to the knee that English gents of a certain time used to wear, brogues, and he's holding his jacket in kind of a proud fashion. He also has quite a double chin going on there. A few too many roast beef dinners. Then we've got the farmer's wife, who was carrying a basket and is a real homely little character. She's got her sort of almost medieval style shoes. And she's very jolly, as you can see. Then we've got, this is the very first character I made, the very, very first model. What did I call him? Mr. Toadflax? Mr. something. And he was holding an umbrella. I've lost all the, well, not lost, but the props, the accessories that go with the figures, I don't have anymore. So his legs are moulded in Fimo and are hard and are loosely covered with corduroy. His shoes are also Fimo. His cuffs are ironed and starched cotton, and the little buttons are in fact black knots of cotton thread. His jacket is real green velvet, sewn with great difficulty on such a small scale. His hat is felt. He's a pixie gentleman, as you can see, with quite a profile. His collar is, I was still doing cotton collars at the time. I hadn't realised that paper was easier, and he has a little waistcoat. Now, Mr. Hawthorne can't sit down because his legs were so long and thin that in order to get a good shape in the trousers, I had to model them solidly in Fimo rather than join them with wire at the waist. Then we have Stan, I think I called him Stan, who's sowing seed in the field. He has his seed in his apron, which he's holding up, and that really is, I think it's pepper and something glued to his apron, and he's casting it away in this hand. He's got ruddy cheeks, a very amiable face, a kind of beat up little linen cap, another real leather jacket, leather waistcoat, orange corduroy trousers and yellow clogs. I really love Stan. Then we have Mother Cherry, I think I called this lady. She's also a pixie lady. She's very much inspired by the kind of Enid Blyton stories, hence the name Mother, which is a title that often crops up. She's a very delicate little lady, as you can see by her hands and her pose. She has kind of Heidi-esque shoes, which are moulded Fimo painted black and white, and then black threads are taken up the legs. Pink and white check cotton skirt with 2 types of ribbon, a delicate pinafore, and what is that called? Dirndl? I'm not sure. She has a very cheerful little face and a headscarf. Then we have a witch, whose face I love. It's quite masculine and actually quite frightening, I think, partly because it's masculine, but she's a woman. And she did have a broomstick as well, raggedy sleeves and raggedy hem, and a black cat. I made a Fimo cat for her as well. The hat I starched with lots of spray starch. Then we have a chef. The hat again was very, very difficult. Sometimes I would just forego making a pattern altogether and kind of scrunch up fabric and glue it in place and just hope for the best. Oh, sorry, my knees are hurting again. Yes, here's the chef. He was holding a tray of bread, but I haven't got that with me at the moment. He's got quite his tummy. He's got his white, actually he's a baker, not a chef, white baker shoes on and white neckerchief. I was pretty happy with the way the shirt or jacket turned out on him. Then we have I'm trying to remember her name. Anyway, a lady of the manor, and she was holding pince nez. How do you pronounce that? The kind of lorgnettes. Little silver lorgnettes that I found in a doll's house shop. Her hat was, again, one of those ventures never to be repeated. This is kind of a coarse, very, very thick linen, which looks a lot like straw. I think this is the same pink organza that we used for Miss Mary Banks's dress. She has some lace ruffling and a gold brooch, which was actually just a little piece of lace painted with gold paint, a real woolen cardigan with pockets, and a tweed-like skirt. And her hair is elegantly taken up in a kind of swept updo, and she did have tiny gold dropper earrings, which were tiny gold seeds, I think, or grains that I painted gold, but sadly they've fallen off. And finally we have, at least this is the last of the figures I have in London, there are quite a lot more at home in my parents' house. Ivan, I think I called him Ivan. He's supposed to be Russian. His jacket is golden, I think it is some expensive material, but we just bought a tiny bit of it. The trimming is gold painted lace. It's It's a real leather belt. He has ash blonde hair, icy blue eyes, and a rich wine colour, kind of puffy trousers and boots. So those are all the little people that I've got here in London. I hope you enjoyed the tour and a bit of background about how I came to do this crazy project and what led to it and what happened as a result of it. And in the next video I will show you some of the Duckworths and tell you a little bit about the project that I've wanted to start for so many years now, and I think I'll actually have to save till my retirement or till I'm an old lady, because only then might I have the time or space or money to do it, hopefully. And that is to make a seaside town, a modern seaside town, but sort of late 80s, early 1990s, and make this family's house and their friends' houses and the cliffs and the sea and an island just off the coast. And well, basically I need an air hanger to do it, but I've wanted to do it for so long, since I was about 10 years old, when I first had the idea of a little girl called Meg Duckworth, and maybe one day I will get to do that. So the next video will be dedicated to showing you the characters that will populate this little village, seaside village, which I think I'll call something like Ogmore-on-Sea, which is actually a real place in Wales. Not that I particularly like Ogmore-on-Sea, but something on sea. I can see it all so clearly. So I'll tell you about that next time.